Okay, today I have an opportunity to get to know somebody new. His name's Mark Ballora, and this is kind of a result of a funny little set of dominoes tipping over. I had two people scheduled to interview this week, and both of them kind of bagged on me. And so at the last minute, I put up on Facebook, "Help, who should I interview?" And Meg Shadell pointed me at Mark. And so I did a quick peek at his website, and I all of a sudden was quite intrigued. So with that, I reached out. He was into doing a quick turnaround interview. So with that, we'll say hello to Mark. Hey, Mark, how are you?
Hi, Darwin. Nice to be here. I'm glad to be a pinch hitter for you today.
Yeah, well, and frankly, wish I would have thought to reach out to you sooner because some of your research work, especially, is some areas that are really interesting to me. Why don't we start off and have you tell people what you do for a gig and what some of your focus is?
Well, my gig is a professor of music technology, and that's at Penn State University. So I teach the standard basics in music technology, how to work with a digital audio workstation, musical acoustics, history of electroacoustic music, some programming classes in Max MSP and Super Collider. When I'm not teaching, I will compose. Although the composing work has drifted into kind of a niche area of sound work, of sonifying data sets. Like most of the time when I look at my friends' bios, they list all these distinguished musicians and recording artists and people like that they've worked with. And I get jealous, but then I realize, I've worked with some world-renowned scientists,
Right.
and that's what I do. That's what makes me different from everybody else, I suppose, is that I enjoy collaborating with scientists and turning their data sets into sound. I like to think of it as musical sound, although it should be informative musical sound. If I do it properly, it will provide a different modality for studying a data set by creating a graph that is done with sound instead of that is done for the eyes with shapes and color and
Right.
sizes and so forth. And so to me, that's quite interesting as a composer to work with scientists and to see if I can help them communicate or understand their data sets better. And of course, it also raises interesting questions about why do we have ears as well as eyes? There are things that the ears tell us that the eyes don't, and vice versa. There's a reason we have both of them. They're redundant in some ways, but in other ways they supplement each other and provide information that the other doesn't. And so you can get into sound design questions of what would sound add to this that you don't get from a visual graph, and how might that be interesting for either helping somebody understand the data set better or helping somebody who can't see experience a data set, who would not be able to see it, or to engage students who might find a static or a silent graph to be somewhat remote, and therefore a challenge for a teacher who's trying to get them excited about a new field of study that may be foreign and a bit intimidating to them. And there's this chance that perhaps if it's presented as music, it will be inviting to them and get them interested in something that they haven't been interested in previously. I guess I should stress that I'm not the only person that does this. I mean, Meg does this,
Mm-hmm.
my friend who introduced you to me. Meg does this. There's an international organization called the International Community for Auditory Display that has a conference every year. There are people like Bruce Walker at Georgia Tech and Camille Perez. She does work in sonification. There's a guy named Philart Jiang who works at Michigan Tech. There's Thomas Hermann over in Bielefeld in Germany. There are people all over who do this kind of thing. So I'm just one person who does this. I guess what makes me lucky is that I was able to sort of, I mean, you laugh that you found me by accident when you put the call out, but that's how I do everything. I always kind of slip in. I slip in through the back door, and hopefully it's the right place for me to be. So I was working down at the College of Information Science and Technology here at Penn State. And I was working on teaching an experimental course and on sonification and writing a chapter for a book. And that was all kind of fun. And I had spent some years, working on various projects thinking, it's inevitable that sound is going to be a key to information for scientists. Somebody's going to crack that nut, and I hope it's me. I hope that I'm the one who comes up with the killer app that suddenly is like a light switch going on and everybody goes, wow, how did we ever get by without this? And suddenly everybody's listening to things. It was kind of starting to bother me that that didn't seem to be happening. After like 10 to 15 years, nobody seemed to be coming up with that aha moment that revolutionized things. And I was starting to think, maybe there won't be an aha moment. And why should there be? If you have scientists who have worked in their field for 20, 30, 40 years and they've relied on visual graphs, they're going to listen to me. Hey, I got just the thing you need. All you need is a pair of speakers and a good pair of headphones, and you need to get into the habit of listening to stuff. And,
Right.
of course, they're like, well, okay, thank you. We'll look into this. And, sometimes there's cautious interest, but it certainly wasn't the revolution that I had hoped for. So serendipitously enough, I saw that a musician that I'd always admired was playing downtown in our state theater. This was Mickey Hart from the Grateful Dead. He's one of their drummers and this ethnomusicologist and very, very musically and culturally curious fellow. And I saw that he was working on this film with George Smoot, who is a Nobel laureate. He's at Lawrence Berkeley, or University of California, Berkeley. Lawrence has a few incarnations there, but he's in the research division. He helped to discover cosmic microwave background radiation, and so for that he was a co-laureate of the Nobel Prize in 2005, 2006. So he had taken his Nobel money and set up this Berkeley Center for Cosmological Physics, which was an outreach program to interest kids in science and set the scientific agenda for the 21st century. So he's working on this outreach project with Mickey Hart, a film called Rhythms of the Universe. And they wanted to have visualizations and sonifications and do this kind of rhapsodic, poetic celebration of humanity's innate yearning to understand the cosmos. And they had done this dry run of it at a conference in Mexico. And I read this little thing about it, and it said, we're going to be continuing to work on this, and if anyone has data sets they would like to contribute to this, they can contact this fellow at Berkeley Labs. And so I thought, wow, I didn't know Mickey Hart was doing sonification. How did I not know this? So I thought, well, let me just, drop this fellow a line and offer my services to them. And so I got my foot in the door there, and that to me was a game changer, because one, it upped my game as far as the quality of the work I was doing, because then it wasn't so much a concern of how informative is this, how accurate is this, can we understand something from this. It had to function as music. And so I figured somebody like Mickey Hart was not going to be interested in having an intellectual discussion with me about why this was an accurate rendition of a data set. If I was lucky, he would listen to something, and within a second or two, it would turn him on or it wouldn't. And that was going to be that. So it had to sound good. So it had to do both things. It had to have the scientific integrity, but it also had to sound good. Fortunately, I passed that test. But I thought, maybe this is the key to this. Rather than trying to change the way scientists work now, if we can get to kids, and if we can raise a generation of kids thinking that science is something that you listen to as well as that you look at, that aha moment may come from one of these kids, and it may be 20 or 30 years. But if they just grow up thinking, well, of course you listen to it, just like of course you look at it, that was probably a more promising route to go. So I switched my focus more to musical scientific outreach than in informatics. And that was a healthy shift. I mean, it was a great project to work on, this film called Rhythms of the Universe that they did. That started to open some doors here at Penn State. I've been running around talking to people, rubbing sticks together for a few years and never quite getting anything to ignite. But
What a
but
great
it's
way to describe that process. I know exactly what you mean. It's hilarious.
yeah, well, but it's a funny thing because we'd go around and have coffee with people, and we'd have these pleasant chats the way you do, and they're, oh, okay, well, well, but of course, this, have you thought of this? And then I'd say, yeah, but, well, I met with Richard Alley, who's a renowned climate scientist here at Penn State. He's a world expert in this. He's, like the press turns to him when they want to know things. I see him on CNN sometimes. And so he's saying things to me like, well, okay, so if you're taking data points and you're making them into a pitch, you have to multiply them or transpose them, or you have to do something to them to make a useful pitch. So if I listen to this, I'm not going to know what the actual value is. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. If that's what you need,
Hmm.
then this is probably not very useful
A
for you.
numeric display might be what you're looking for.
Right, right. What's the right tool for the job?
Right.
Right. If you want to understand the dynamics, if you want to understand the behavior of a function over time, well, then this could be really useful because that's what the ear is really good at, is sensing little changes in rhythms and pitch and things like this. So then I knew, okay, be on the lookout for that question because people are going to be asking it. So have that answer ready. Anyway, I do this and people start to get interested in this. And like 3 years later, I went to Richard Alley's Friday pizza seminar with his grad students. And it was to see if anybody had some climate data that we could use in a symposium that was coming up. So they said, yeah, we don't know what we're going to do, but, come on to the seminar. You're welcome. And I said, oh, really? Because I have this movie that I could show you if you want. And they said, yeah, okay. So I went there and I showed them Rhythms of the Universe, and Richard absolutely loved it. He was like, wow, my goodness, what a fantastic outreach tool this kind of thing is. And it's like, gee, a few years in a good project makes all the difference, doesn't
Right.
it?
Right.
You didn't know what I was talking about before, but now that I've got something in hand, you can see what I mean. Yeah, funny story about Richard Alley. But I was able to do, they had a thing called the Polar Center at Penn State. It was a scientific outreach arm of the Earth and Mineral Science department. So they did these seminars each year. It's like a one-day symposium where they talked about Arctic and Antarctic issues and issues of climate. And so they asked me and a grad student to do some sonifications. They thought it would be interesting. So we sonified, we got, based on this pizza lunch, we talked to a guy named Dave Pollard who had all this ice core data of the Antarctic. So it told the story of conditions there over the past 400,000 years.
Okay.
Of the area of the ice and the volume of the ice and the amount of ice that was connected to the land versus what was like shooting off into the sea and what the solar energy was. And so we represented these 400,000 years in about 6 minutes, and people thought that was kind of neat. So they asked me to do it again the following year, and they connected me with a guy in forestry who measures the body temperatures of Arctic squirrels. See, this is the cool thing about this, is that I meet these people that most other people in the School of Music don't
Yeah,
meet.
never going to run into.
So,
That's right.
yeah, so how many people in this School of Music know that there are people who go up to the Arctic, they go up to northern Alaska, like as close to the North Pole as you can get, and they observe these squirrel colonies. And they know where they live, and they know how many of them there are. And so they capture them, and they implant these little temperature sensors in them. And then they let them go, and the temperature sensors record the squirrel's body temperature it was like every 13 minutes or some odd prime number, 13 minutes or 17 minutes, something like this. But they get these body temperatures for a year, and then they capture them again, those that they can catch again, those that are still alive, and then they remove this thing, and then they can study the data sets. And so they're very interesting animals for a number of reasons. So that was kind of fun. And then I got some interest in that because the picture of the squirrel was so cute. Resist the picture of a squirrel. So you're like, wow, you make sound out of squirrel body temperatures. So yes, I did, and it's actually quite an interesting thing. The way these Arctic squirrels, they go underground and then they go into, they call it torpor, which is like not quasi hibernation. And anyway, these annual cycles are quite interesting. And then the following year, they had me do something based on migrations of caribou. And muskox in Greenland. It's phenology. It cycles in the circle of life. This is
Okay.
something that a number of scientists are interested in. It's like the caribou live on the coast during the year, and then in the spring they come inland to calve, and then they drop their calves, and then they go back to the coast. And so they rely on the food supplies being in place when they get there. They're conservative. They've come at the same time for thousands of years, but because of climate change, it gets a little warmer earlier and the food grows earlier. And by the time they get there, there isn't as much food available.
Okay.
And that's when they really need the food, apparently, is once they've given birth, because they
Right.
need it to lactate,
Right.
to feed them. So it affects their populations. And, it affects the whole food chain. What other animals depend on the caribou being there. So this is something that scientists are interested in. So I did that, and was introduced to a meteorologist named Jenny Evans, who works in tropical storms. And she was interested in having sonifications of these storms and adding them to these satellite videos. You can see satellite videos on NOAA's website, and you can go there and choose one, and you see a satellite video, and that's what they look at. And so she had me add sound to it, and she liked it. She thought it added a lot to it. She also found that it gave her some information sometimes that she didn't get just by looking at the video, that the sound actually told her some things about the storm's dynamics that weren't so apparent from the video. That was a productive meeting. She asked me to do one storm, and then once we got that down, she said, "Oh, well, can you do a few more? I'm going to this conference in Korea. Can you do a few more?" And by the time she went, she had 11 of them in hand, and then she got this idea that we could do a video animation of 12 months of storms on a global map. As she put it, view the spaghetti of storms that occur all over the world throughout the year. She picked 2005. I guess that was an active year. And, it's a very different perspective to look at the whole world and see where and when storms are coming up and intersecting with each other. So this is something that we're really interested in pursuing. As has become apparent over the past month or so, it's kind of important for us to understand tropical storms and their effects and what they can do, especially when I read that there were scientists who were warning developers in Houston, this place is vulnerable to flooding, and if you put concrete and asphalt everywhere, it's going to be even worse because there will be no place for water to go. And of course, they get blown off. "Oh, come on, you're anti-development. We're trying to make money here. What's wrong with you scientists?" And then there we go. Harvey comes through, and it's like, okay, you get the point now.
Well, yeah, and everyone's like, "Well, why didn't you tell us in some way that we understood?"
That's true. There is something to that. There is something to that. I met with somebody just yesterday. I was at University of Rhode Island, and he said that very thing. That, we try to put warnings out, and we think that we're being clear because we get it. It sometimes isn't clear to people who don't spend their whole lives doing this.
Yeah.
And so, he found this interesting because it's very engaging. I mean, everybody that I've shown these videos to, these satellite videos, and you see them on the news sometimes on TV, it's like you see these kind of swirling things over a shifting map, and you have things like state outlines drawn in. It's kind of hard to see, and it tends to jump around, and there are these colors that show something. I don't know, but if you know what you're looking at, it's informative. But I add, for example, this swirling, windy sound to reflect air pressure levels. So as air pressure drops, the storm gets more intense, and so you can hear the storm getting more intense quite clearly. And everybody who's seen these goes, "Wow, that is so much more visceral. It is so much more engaging when the sound is added to this movie." And so this fellow I met at University of Rhode Island, he's interested in this. This could help him make his case that there is a danger and that this is what can happen. So I was at University of Rhode Island because I'm partnering up with some oceanographers up there. Actually, I had an opportunity to go to this conference. They call it a conference, but it's more like a workshop think tank. It's It was called NACFI, which is National Academy's Keck Futures Initiative. The Keck Foundation, Keck, they were an oil family on the
Oh,
West
okay.
Coast,
All right.
like about 100 years ago. So if you go to the West Coast, you'll find Keck institutes and Keck museums and Keck this and Keck that. They were a philanthropic family. You know, they were like the Carnegies and
Got it.
Rockefellers, people like this.
Okay.
So they put some money aside with the National Academies of Science, Medicine, and Engineering to do these conferences based on a theme each year, where they would bring people together about a given theme. So I guess one year it was like neurology. Can't think of what they did in other years, but 2016 was the deep blue sea.
Okay.
What can we say about the ocean? The ocean is important. It is the source of a lot of life and energy on this planet, and its characteristics are changing due to climate change, and there's a whole lot we don't know about it. You know, they're constantly discovering new species there, new characteristics underground, like under the ocean. You know, like these thermal vents a few years back were a huge discovery. So that was the theme last year, and they were starting to bring artists to this thing too. And the idea was, put you guys in. So it wasn't like a conference where you have people who deliver papers and talks. They were like, okay, this is when it is, and we want you here for the whole time. And we want you to tell us where your interest is, and we want to put you into groups, and we want you guys just to percolate and come up with stuff you could do together. What are some interdisciplinary projects that could either advance the discipline in terms of research or in terms of communication? Because they recognize that as being important too, almost as important as the research.
Right.
Right? If the general population is ignorant, then they don't know what's going on. You want people who are aware of what the issues are so that they will elect politicians who will make conscientious policies.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So what's the best way of doing that? And they thought, we'll bring artists in. So I applied to go to this thing, and they took me. And so I met Karen Wishner there, who is a oceanographer at University of Rhode Island, and she thought, you know, I show these graphs to students in Intro to Oceanography class. It would be kind of interesting to see how they would respond to them if we presented them as sound.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you know, this is actually exactly what I need, because that's the case I'm trying to make, is that this is a good thing. This will help students learn. And I've had people come up to me after I give, you know, like enthusiastic talks like, wow, isn't this cool? Look at this movie I worked on, and da-da-da-da. And then somebody's going to come up to me giving me this look like I'm a used car salesman or something, and they're going to say, so what assessment data do you have on this?
Right.
And then I sort of say, well, I mean, I did a little bit when I wrote my thesis, but that was really the least interesting part of it. But I mean, I've got that. And I was kind of, you know, I come from the arts, you know, music, it's like, how do you assess a symphony? I mean, what does that even mean? We don't think in those terms, but I've evolved and thought, you know, not having anything whatsoever is indeed a liability, and it does hurt my case. And it would be really nice if I had a class like a college students, and if I worked with somebody who does know how to do this, a science education specialist, right, who knows how to do assessments. I mean, the right kind of assessments. I mean, there are some assessments that I've compared it to, like refining wheat to make white bread. You know, it's like you take all the good stuff out. There are assessments that do that. Like, I'm going to be real cautious when my kid starts taking standardized tests in school this year, and I'm going to be going, okay, no one number is going to tell me how smart my kid is, right? You know, but you want to do these tests. We'll see how it goes. But there are correct ways of doing it. I mean, they have focus groups for movies and albums and things like that. So that's what we're going to do. We applied for one of the NACFI seed grants, and lo and behold, they gave it to us. So I went up to Rhode Island earlier this week, and I met with Karen. And then while I was there, I met with this meteorologist. And so they're really eager to try this. They think there's some real potential there. And we talked about spending a couple of days doing these graphs about what species you find at what depth. There's this a thing that they call the diel vertical migrations, and it's this kind of amazing pattern. These creatures that travel up and down several hundred or thousand meters every day. They come up at night to feed near the surface, and then they skedaddle down below the surface to avoid predators during the day. And it's like a human being running 100 miles back and forth every day. Consider the size of these creatures. So this is something that they're real interested in. And they go out on these ocean voyages, and they keep finding new little critters out there that are doing this. And so what do you find where and when is something that she's interested in. So we were going to spend a couple of days on that, but then I'm talking with her partner, and he's like, well, we do general science stuff, so, I mean, there's no reason we couldn't do other things too, and just present a bunch of stuff via sound throughout the semester this spring. And wouldn't that be interesting to see if the students remember that as an interesting part of this class, that you played us all these interesting things? Having NACFE invest in us to do that, it's amazing. That's what I've been needing, is buy-in from somebody. There's somebody to give us a grant and say, yeah, find out about this. Here's $50,000, get back to us. That's like, wow, thank you very much. This is a big step from being like the dancing monkey in a scientific presentation. It's like, oh, by the way, we've got Mark here who's going to play us some nice music. Thank you very much, Mark. Now back to our regularly scheduled programming. I mean, that was good. There's a time and a place for that. But like, to really dig in and make a case, I need to be able to do this. And so that's where we are. I mean, it's nice. It's been getting some real interest. Penn State put the word out on me, and so I've been hearing from a lot of journalists who are interested in this and getting speaking invitations. And the other grant that I got from NACFE was to work with a marine biologist and musician. Her name is Heather Spence. She works for a thing called Michelle's Earth Foundation, and she happens to have an interest in underwater recordings. So she records underwater around the Gulf of Mexico all the time. Mm-hmm. And she studies the life down there based on what she can hear. So she can hear, oh yeah, I can hear a lobster there. And I mean, she knows how to recognize these auditory cues. After I finish working with Karen Wishner this year, then I get to spend another year and a half working with Heather. And that's going to be a more of an artistic-based project where it'll be like a performance piece. And we'll start with her recordings underwater, and then on top of that, we'll layer sonifications of characteristics of, let's say, the water, or the temperature, the salinity, the oxygen content, things like this that she has. And then I'll translate some of that data to the cello, and she'll play the cello on top of this, and I'll translate it to flute as well, because my wife plays the flute. So there'll be this flute cello duet playing over this electroacoustic and underwater acoustic recording. Mm-hmm. That's going to be a lot of fun. Sure. So that was the second grant I got from NACFE. So that's going to keep me out of trouble for a couple of.
Well, it sounds like one of the things that I'd say is that you are starting to get validation for some of these ideas that hasn't existed previously.
Yeah, you keep at it long enough, and that can start to happen.
Well, I also think it's interesting that you're getting validation along a lot of different avenues. I mean, the kind of validation you get from Mickey Hart's attention is maybe a little bit different than the kind of validation you get from a NACFE grant, which is different from what you get being asked to do an interview on CNN or whatever. It's really interesting that it's kind of coming from a lot of different avenues simultaneously. Do you think that some of that is an influence of the fact that data visualization has gotten to be so ubiquitous that now people are like, well, if visualization works, sonification might work too? Do you think that it's sort of like a tag-along function, or do you think it's because it activates people in a unique way?
Yes, to all of that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's. ICAD came into being in the early '90s when it was becoming clear that the future of communicating information was not confined to print, which is what it had been up until
Hmm.
about that time. But the emergence of powerful computing, I mean, what I can do in my laptop now is far more than I could do when I was in college. I mean, when I was in college, personal computers were just coming out, and
Right.
fonts were the big thing. So the rise in what digital technologies allow us to do and how they allow us to combine information. The people who started ICAD, I mean, most particularly Gregory Kramer, he was the one who said, well, sound has existed in science. I mean, we've got things like sonars and Geiger counters and other things. Let me do a comprehensive study of this and put it all together and codify it and make this into a field, because uh, that's going to be a way to communicate in the near future. And certainly now, with a lot of books being online or portions of books online. We hosted the ICAD conference here last summer. I chaired it, and Meg was one of the co-chairs, and she did this session on putting things on Wikipedia and how to make information available like this, and how to make sonifications and put them onto Wikipedia, and that was one of the points that our keynote made, Carla Scaletti, is that we're
Yeah.
very close to a time where you'll just read stuff online and there will be a button that says turn the sound on,
Right.
and then people will listen to it, whatever they're looking at the graph. Let me turn that into a melody or something, and then listen to it. And the reason that they'll be interested in doing that is that it's cool to listen to stuff. I mean, as human beings, we like music. We are extremely responsive to music as a species. That's one of the things that separates humans from other forms of life, is that we have this very refined art of music that's extremely powerful. I went to a talk a couple of weeks ago with Forum, the Penn State Forum. They bring in authors and artists and people like this, and they give these luncheons at the hotel. So there's a hotel lunch room holding about 400 people, 300, 400 people, I don't know.
Hmm.
But it's this fellow who wrote this book called We Gotta Get Out of This Place, and it's about the music. He's a sociologist and a Vietnam veteran, and he's writing about what a cultural focus the armed forces radio network was for the
Okay.
troops in
All right.
Vietnam, and how it did so many things for them. And it was this common culture that they all had. Troops don't have that now because they're wearing earbuds and listening to iPods, But back then they were all listening to the same thing, and there was all this music, and all of them have stories attached to these different songs, and so he's playing these excerpts of songs from people who are my age and a little bit older. I was in grade school during the Vietnam War, so I had a limited understanding of what it was, but I heard the music. I could tell it was powerful, even though I didn't fully understand it. So here he is playing excerpts of Bridge Over Troubled Water and What's Going On and Stop, Say, What's That Sound? Or Bob Dylan. And when he does this, it is just palpable. The whole room goes, oh, I love that song. And
Hmm.
they're nodding their heads and they're singing along to it. And then he tells the story of why it was important to this soldier in the book. But then he's like, but you see how important it is to all of you? You all have your stories associated with this too. That is the power of music. Music taps into our memory centers and our emotional centers in a way that other senses just don't. And so, I mean, when I was in Rhode Island, I mentioned that, and I said, I want to be careful here. I mean, I played you these sonifications. I mean, I'm not saying that these sonifications are the next bridge over troubled water or anything like that. But what I am saying is that music has power. That's not my opinion. That's not a supposition. We know this. I mean, that's why it's used in Alzheimer's research. It repairs neural pathways. It's a key to remembering things and getting brains that are damaged functioning again. Music has this power, and given that, doesn't it make sense for scientists to leverage musicality in their work and to use this in some way, either for their own edification or for engaging people, whether they are students or policymakers or funders. If you can grab people with music, then you're getting at them in a holistic, intuitive way that you're not going to get by showing them a graph.
I mean, you kind of made mention of some skepticism that came from people who were like saying, well, hey, this maybe isn't a precise way of transferring the data. What are some other areas where you get kind of skepticism about it?
I've had people ask me whether I'm compromising the data. Just to get into a little bit more of how it works, again, right, in the kind of work that I do, there are different approaches to this. So like Thomas Hermann in Bielefeld does it differently as model-based sonification, which is different than this. What I do is what they call parameter-based sonification, and essentially I'm working in a software synthesis program. I work in Super Collider.
Mm-hmm.
So in Super Collider, I can create an instrument, a synthesized instrument, and I can parameterize it. So I can change characteristics of the instrument. So, start the instrument, bong, there it goes now. Change the pitch, change its pan position, change the filter, change the volume, change all of these things. I can do that while it's sounding, or I can keep playing notes on it and have it sound a little bit different, which means that I can bring in the data set, and then I can have that function like a player piano roll or like a MIDI file.
Right.
And then the instrument plays the data set. So sometimes people will say, what do you mean you make an instrument that plays the data set? You're telling me that you're listening to the data? I'm not listening to the data. I'm listening to your instrument, right? And I will say, yeah, you are right. I never said you're actually listening to the data. What I'm saying is that this instrument is an effective way of communicating the behavior of the data.
Mm-hmm.
It is symbolic, sure. Like I say, I'm ready for this one. Then I'll say, you ever look at MapQuest? I got MapQuest here. Here's a satellite picture of where my house is. You see that? You can see that it's kind of green there. I live in the forest, don't I? I don't live at the beach. I don't live on a polar region. Isn't that nice? Okay, would you like to drive to my house? You will probably click the map view button, which is a symbolic view, and it shows you where the streets are. It even shows you where gas stations and hotels and restaurants are, right? And would you say that that has less integrity than the satellite picture? I mean, it's not literal, but it gives you information that you need if you're driving.
Right.
So it's not less integrity. It's what information do you need for the task at hand. And this came up at the premiere of Rhythms of the Universe. George Smoot was really good on these things. He said, when we look at pretty pictures of space, in the media, it doesn't really look like that out there. NASA cleans them up. NASA colorizes it so that we can see electromagnetic bands that are outside of the visible region. And they do it to inform us, and they do it to engage us. And we don't accuse them of cheating or anything. That's what you do. The other thing he said was, when you have a really complex data set, I don't care how complex it is, whether it's the history of the world, whether it's the structure of the DNA molecule, they put it on something that's about the size of a newspaper.
Right.
Because that's what we can take in.
Yep.
And that's not cheating. It's doing what you need to communicate it. It's called informatics. So translation and interpretation and symbolizing is not some renegade streak in sonification. It's what you do when you're communicating information. You put it into terms that can be understood. And then, of course, you offer disclaimers and you say, well, this isn't the real thing, but can you understand? I can show you other ways too, and we can dig deeper, but that's how you get started. So that's another answer I have ready.
Sure.
when people raise that objection. But that's the real thing, that the sonification is really good for dynamics.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that. What in your experience is the best data to catch through sonification?
Yeah. Well, time-based data is a great candidate for sonification. The other thing that's a good candidate is multidimensional data.
Oh yeah, of course.
We know that the ear is better at following multiple streams of information than the eye is. The eye is good for static characteristics like size and color and texture and that kind of thing. The ear is our dynamic sensor. The ear is really good at telling us about pitch, about rhythm, about spectral changes. The ear was designed to warn us immediately when there was a predator in the jungle
Hmm.
that would eat us if we didn't do something quickly. And whether or not we can see it, it's our early response mechanism. That's what Seth Horowitz calls it in his book, The Universal Sense. It's our 24-hour early response mechanism. Yeah, when you have multidimensional data, it can get tricky to visualize it. But sonifying it, it's the same thing as we do when we listen to chamber music. We're listening to multidimensional sound shapes and how they interact with each other. So a time-based multidimensional data set is a real good candidate for sonification.
I think a lot of people would be curious how musical do these sonifications end up, and how much liberty do you feel free to take? Again, this goes back to this idea of, you want to make it a rich and useful and interesting thing for the listener. Taking taking something that's pure data and making it musical, calling something musical is actually kind of a tricky word, I think. Maybe that's what I'm getting
Yes,
at, right?
yeah. Well, sure,
And
sure. I
so
mean,
how do you describe musical in a way that makes sense? Because not everything that's going to come out of a data set is necessarily going to fit the parameters of what people would think of as, say, pretty.
well, that's the design challenge. That's the fun of it. Is putting it into something. I mean, it's the same thing you do when you visualize it. How do I make it look pretty, right?
Right.
But yeah, what is musical? I mean, I gave a talk once, and then there was this person was writing for the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. She was actually writing an article on Meg and sonification, and Meg said, "Hey, Mark's giving a talk. Why don't you talk to him? He'll be in D.C." So she came up and she talked to me afterwards, and her first question was, "Would you call this music?"
Uh-huh.
And I said, "Well, that was kind of the interesting question in the 1950s.
Hmm.
When John Cage was writing pieces like 4 minutes 33 seconds and doing these chance-based pieces, and it was like, is that really music? Listening to the environment, is that music? And that opens up discussions of what it means to listen and what music is, and that, 60 years later, that's kind of, we've had that discussion, and we can kind of accept that anything can be music. I mean, so you can go and buy soundscape CDs and all kinds of things. Anything can function musically, but what I told her was that the more musical sonifications are perceived to be, the more interested people are going to be in working with them.
Right.
That's the question that composers face. They write something that sounds good to them. What
Hmm.
kind of pitches, what kind of counterpoint, what kind of harmonies, what kind of orchestration, what kind of rhythms sound good to me? And gee, I hope they sound good to other people too. And you may have a teacher that helps you and says, it would be more musical if you did this,
Right.
or you might have friends or people like that who help you with that, but it ultimately comes down to the composer writing something that she likes and writing something that speaks to her and hoping that it speaks to others as well. So I'm not sure how to quantify that for composition or for sonification. I mean, it's very gratifying when somebody like Mickey Hart likes the way stuff sounds, or when other people like the way things sound. When Jenny Evans says, "Oh, I want some more of this. Give me some more," or the Polar Center says, "Oh, would you come back again? We really liked what you did last year." That indicates that it's somewhat successful. I gave this talk the other day at University of Rhode Island, and they got their multimedia guy in there to record it, which was nice. And I happened to see him afterwards, and he said, I got to tell you, I don't know how you deal with this, but I found that really distressing to listen to that stuff. If I didn't have a job to do, I would have left the room. It
Oh
just
wow.
really unsettled
Right.
me. And I said, wow, I'm sorry. That's certainly not what I intend, and I haven't heard that before. That's good to know. At least one person had a very negative response to this. I don't know what to do with that just yet. That's like somebody coming up to you and saying, your music sounded terrible to me. I really didn't like it. And you go, well, okay, well, sorry.
Well, but on the other side of it, I mean, if you think of what you did, you basically took a data set and got someone to be emotional about it. That's
It reached
extraordinarily
him. Yeah.
powerful, you know?
Yeah, it got to him.
Right,
That's for
right,
sure.
right. I have to write that down as a future artistic pursuit.
Well, that came up actually when I did my thesis in grad school. I was working with cardiologists. That's how I got started in this. Was
Hmm.
I got a call from a physiologist who was interested in somebody to make sound out of heart rate variability data.
Right.
It was Leon Glass. He was my trip down the rabbit hole, and when he was just this guy. I didn't know he was this pioneer in chaos theory, so that became my thesis. And we were working with a cardiologist at Beth Israel in Harvard, and he suggested that we focus on obstructive sleep apnea and how that shows up in the heart rate. Ari Goldberger, did I say his name? That's who that was. There are these cycles, there are these patterns that you can hear, and it was this kind of woo, woo, woo in a certain way. And I was saying, okay, that's revealing, but it also kind of makes you seasick to listen to it. Ari was like, yeah, but that's good. It is sick. It's unhealthy. I was like, no, it's not good. I don't want to make people sick by listening to this stuff. It makes me sick to listen to this. So I'm going to have to change this somehow. So, yeah, that came up back then.
Yeah, I don't necessarily want to actually experience the physical issues of the patients. Not
Correct.
not a
Yeah.
winner.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, I can't believe our time is already up. But before I let you go, all of this discussion makes me want to ask what's probably going to be the most obvious and probably the question that you're asked more than anything, but I still want to know the answer. Of all the different kinds of data that you've worked with and all the different kinds of scientists and sciences you've interacted with, what's been the one that's been most interesting for you?
The cosmological stuff that I did for rhythms of the universe. But of course, that was a whole range of data sets. But, that played into my early, Star Trek fan self and my
Hmm.
little kid who watched the moon landings and all of that. The stars, the astronomy, that's I've always found that captivating. The natural sciences are of interest to me. So like I'm real happy to work with oceanographers as a conscientious human being who is concerned about what the planet is going to be like when my son is my age. I would like people to be aware of keeping this place healthy. And if I can do anything to help with that effort through sonification, let's just say I don't have any trouble sleeping at night
Right.
doing that. So I'm real gratified that so many people seem to like these tropical storm sonifications. I mean, whether they're my favorite or not, everybody seems to want to hear more of these
Hmm.
and want to do more of those. And Jenny Evans is somebody who was willing to work with me and say, could you tweak this? Could you tweak that? And not just say, oh, yeah, okay, thanks, Mark. That was nice. I'll call you. But who really wanted to see it work and really
Yeah.
wants to continue to see it to work. And I'm dependent on that. I can't do this by myself. It's an inherently multidisciplinary task. So I need a scientist who is committed to making this work. And so that was Jenny. She's fantastic. So I guess the storms, I can't get away from how effective those seem to be.
Right.
I'm kind of dancing around your question because it's like saying, what's your favorite child?
Sure, I imagine. Well, and also the fact is that normally in my podcast we talk a lot more about people's background. We didn't get a chance to because your like current work is so vital and huge. But I think also there's something about this being an unexpected source of collaboration and how completely engaging that must be. I mean, instead of just treading the same lines of, well, I'm going to find a drummer and a bass player to play with, or a cellist and a violinist to play with. Instead,
Yeah.
you're like, well, I'm going to find I'm going to find someone who really understands network to data, and I'm going to find somebody who understands storm data, and the three of us are going to collaborate on something amazing. I mean, that just seems like that's got to be so freeing and so interesting.
That's it. That's exactly it. I feel so much smarter for being able to interact with all of these scientists. I mean, who are much smarter than I am, but dabbling in cardiology and meteorology and cosmology and now oceanography. I mean, it's so enriching to be exposed to the way all of these people think and see things, and to be able to join all of that with music. To me, that's more interesting as a composer than whatever else I might think to do. Although I like to keep my hand in on this. So I mean, my wife is a flutist, and they're hoping to play at the flute convention next year. Some of her collaborators, they're from Taiwan, and they asked me to write a flute piece for them. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll fit that in somehow. And they're like, we have this theme of the ocean and the winds of the ocean. And my wife was like, wow, he's visiting with oceanographers as we speak. I bet he's going to love this. So it's even going to be able to find a way somehow into writing for a flute trio, which is kind of cool.
That's fantastic. Well, Mark, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk with us and kind of fill us in on this world. I've been wanting to talk to somebody about sonification for a while, and this is really fascinating. It's really interesting to be able to dive in on the subject a little bit. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been a privilege to be here.
All right. With that, I'll let you have the rest of your day. Thank you so much, and bye now.
Bye-bye.
Many thanks to Mark for spending time talking to us about sonification. It's good to know that we've got somebody on the job not only helping us to interact with the data, but actually to help us understand it. Thank you so much for continuing to listen, for passing this along to friends, family, whoever. I really appreciate it. Stay tuned. We got a lot of great stuff coming up in the next few weeks. So with that, I'll let you go. Have a great one. Bye.